Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jason Grimay, the president of the Bipartisan Policy Center, and it is my true delight to welcome you all to the international, possibly even the global premiere of the movie Utah Together. It's about a 20-minute film, and it will be followed by an expert discussion about the remarkable example that the state of Utah has achieved in trying to kind of integrate LGBTQ rights and religious freedom. A couple of reasons that we're really delighted to be doing this. As a guy running a thing called the Bipartisan Policy Center, you will not be surprised at this moment in our political history. I am occasionally met with what I could politely describe as incredulity about the potential for bipartisan achievements heading into midterm elections. And when asked to provide examples of what's possible, I'll take out the Farm Bill, supply chain, pandemic preparedness, generally get people kind of nodding along. And then I enjoy mentioning the historic opportunity for the US Congress to pass legislation modeled on work in Utah that would in fact integrate LGBTQ rights and religious freedom. That tends to get people's attention. And I think what we're going to talk about today owes a lot to the truly creative, courageous, and really tenacious work of a lot of people featured in the film, people who will be participating and help to design this forum. And as you all probably know, collaboration is actually really hard. Just sitting in your tribal camps and throwing snowballs, that's actually not courageous or hard. But actually working together, particularly on an issue that is so emotionally freighted, incredibly hard work. And this was not a short operation. There were at least 7 years of hard work that went into passing this legislation. In addition to having a significant achievement in its own right, it also created a lot of space for additional productive conversations. And so we think that there really is a opportunity here to create a foundation for just a better, smarter, conversation at the federal level. I want to kind of close this out by reading a quote from the former board chair of Equality Utah, Marina Gomberg. I think it really kind of sums it up. She said, "In order to protect LGBTQ people, we don't have to deny religious liberties. And in order to provide protections for religious liberties, we don't have to deny LGBTQ people. The idea that what we do is a fallacy is that, got to do that better. The idea that we do, is a fallacy that Utah has dismantled." I think with that challenge, we're going to now turn it over to the film. But before we do, I want to pre-introduce our moderator for the discussion that follows. That is Chris Johnson. He is the chief political and White House reporter for the Washington Blade, and he will bring some really smart people together to reflect on the discussion. You can also ask questions, and Chris will remind you all how to do that. So again, thanks, and here comes the show.
An historic bill at the state capitol this evening.
Utah is attempting to do something novel and do something great. We are attempting to balance LGBT rights in employment and housing with religious liberties.
The bill is a product of negotiations between some key lawmakers up here on the Hill, gay rights advocates, and the Mormon Church.
People outside of Utah would never imagine that our state would lead on LGBTQ rights, but we have.
In order to protect LGBTQ people, we don't have to deny religious liberties. And in order to provide protections for religious liberties, we don't have to deny LGBTQ people. The idea that we do is a fallacy that Utah has dismantled.
Standing side by side, members of the LGBT community and LDS community cheered together.
What does it mean when Equality Utah and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the leadership of the Democratic and Republican parties all stand together in a room and cheer for the same thing? This is a cultural milestone.
The miracle of what we've seen in Utah is that religious freedoms and the rights of the LGBTQ community can both be protected.
I felt really grateful and proud of what occurred here in Utah. It's a great example of what can be done in this country if we'll just make an effort and come together and try to find some common ground.
On our broadcast tonight, same-sex marriage is headed to the Supreme Court. It's a showdown over one of the biggest cultural issues of our time.
For more than 2 decades, all across the country, our community has been gripped in this struggle over marriage equality. This fight often divided LGBTQ people and religious denominations, and that was certainly the case in Utah. Utah is very unique. The geography is amongst some of the most beautiful in the nation, but it is highly hyper-conservative. The Utah legislature in any given year is approximately 80% Republican, and 90% of the legislators belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. When you are working with LGBT rights in a state like Utah, and you want to advance legal equality, you can't do it without working with Republicans, with conservatives, with people of faith.
You have to embrace the fact that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are going to be part of your work. We, for a long time, had a very antagonistic relationship, and that didn't serve either of us well.
On one side, you had the LDS Church, the Catholic Church, and other denominations pitted against those of us pushing for the freedom to marry. And the tension was ripping our families apart because so many of us in the community grew up in Latter-day Saint homes. I had grown up in the LDS Church. I belonged to a giant Mormon family. And so many of the people that are my friends in our community have estranged relationships with their parents or siblings, aunts and uncles. So this wasn't just about politics. These divisions were breaking up our families.
For a long time, I think there were a lot of concerns between groups of faith and the LGBTQ community. You know, they didn't really have a close relationship with us. We didn't have a close relationship with them. We really got into what I would call a spin cycle of battling points of view to determine whose views are going to win. I think 2008 was the year that the relationship changed between Equality Utah and the church. That was the year when leaders of the LGBT community started meeting with leaders of the church behind closed doors, having really candid conversations, hard stories to tell and hard stories to hear.
But we started asking ourselves a really critical question. Where do we have common ground? We know we don't agree on marriage equality, but what do we agree on?
The church was making a concerted effort to explain that they were not uniformly opposed to LGBT rights. In fact, that they supported employment and housing anti-discrimination laws.
So the dialogue with the church continued to grow. And by 2015, we were both ready to come to the table and hammer out a deal. The bill would provide legal protections in housing and employment for LGBTQ Utahns. The heart and the core of the negotiations was, can we balance LGBTQ rights and religious freedom?
When I first heard that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Equality Utah wanted to work together on a piece of legislation, I'm not quite sure if I really believed it.
I told both sides, if you bring a bill to me that only talks about one side of the issue, equality, equal rights, alone, or if you bring religious freedom alone, I'll veto both bills. I will only accept a bill that has both of them combined. That way I know both sides will feel like they've been treated fairly.
The more of us that came out to our families, to our congregations, to our friends and relatives, or our workplaces, the more people started to challenge their own personal beliefs about what it means to be gay.
Once we began to really build deep and long-term relationships and began to actually see the humanity of each other, that really began to give us the platform to begin to build towards the passage of the legislation.
The beauty of this session is that we're all having difficult conversations together. This is new. This session has truly been a game changer, and we see this as a positive trend for the future.
We've had stakeholders on both sides put aside some of their deep-seated feelings to try to find balance.
This was truly a bipartisan effort, and not only were we starting to bring Republicans on board, we had our loyal Democrats at our side.
When it comes to religious liberty and when it comes to non-discrimination for LGBT people, we are there together.
These were difficult conversations. These were difficult dialogues. We'd have big debates over sentences and paragraphs and commas where I thought this could be derailed at any moment.
We were keenly aware that there were lines that we could not cross, and we had to know those very clearly with great specificity, and we just simply had to regard the protection of those lines as a solemn responsibility.
Governor Gary Herbert could not wait to show off Utah's new anti-discrimination law to the hundreds of supporters that stood behind him and the law at the Capitol on Thursday.
I do believe that what we've done here will become a model for the rest of the country of how they too can resolve these issues in their own respective states.
One question, how cool is this?
Elder Tom Perry, LDS Quorum of the 12, was also on hand and was given a big debt of gratitude by the legislators for his support.
Listen, we believe in fairness for all. We're anxious to move forward. I think this is a great step.
Aside from the LDS Church, other denominations were supporting this effort. The Catholic Bishop of Salt Lake City at the time was John Wester, who was no supporter of marriage equality, but he got behind the effort to protect LGBTQ people and religious liberty.
I think other denominations can learn that sometimes you have to take initiative and you have to sit down with people who you don't agree with. You can't be afraid. You have to have those conversations with them to find a way to promote human flourishing, and that's exactly what the LDS Church did.
Such a solid moment of joy, right? I remember seeing the speakers themselves getting emotional and realizing what a gift the LGBT community had given them to see themselves in this fundamental moment in Utah's history and the incredible role that they played in actually saying to all Utahns, you know what, you're welcome here and you're a part of our community. So it was very emotional for me, and as it is to this day.
Some people call this the Utah Compromise, and I actually don't like that term because no one compromised anything. We simply gave additional rights to the LGBTQ community, and we gave additional rights to the religious community.
I don't think anybody compromised their principles in this process. What we did was we worked together, and we had hard conversations, and we listened a lot, and we figured out what mattered most.
We were always trying to balance religious liberties and LGBTQ rights. And we're talking about a right to believe as your conscience dictates. Now, that's a right I never want to take away from anybody. And at the same time, I think it's absolutely wrong for a person to be discriminated in housing, in employment. There's a lot more to this conversation. We haven't figured this out, but we've made progress.
This work is hard, but people can come together if they view compromise as a good thing. I want this to be where it's society for everyone, where we celebrate individual differences, we protect each other's rights, and so that, in fact, Utah is together in all things.
As I went through the process, it was actually kind of life-changing to me because I felt before as I was trying to protect my religious beliefs, and that going through this process, I actually felt like I was living my religion.
Two of our staunchest allies on the Republican side here in Utah have been known in the past of being far right. And both of them have been willing to talk with us. Both of them have taken education, and both of them have moved over time. And it shows the impact of engaging instead of just getting mad, throwing up your arms, and walking away.
After the first big breakthrough, we realized that we had built these meaningful relationships with all the key stakeholders in our state. We weren't done. We could begin talking about other issues that were important to our community. The first issue that we tackled was discrimination in public schools. It's known as the No Promo Homo Law. This is a law that prevented teachers from even talking about LGBT people in public schools. And we were able to work with the leadership of both parties to have the law repealed by an almost unanimous vote. And the momentum continued. In 2019, we were able to pass the first meaningful hate crime protections for LGBT people in our state.
The passage of the hate crimes law was a big step for the trans community to be able to be visible. Without it, we feel like we have to hide in the shadows. And with this, we feel more visible, we feel empowered to be out and about and to be our authentic selves.
I'm an immigrant from Mexico, and right after high school, I joined the United States Air Force, and that was in 1999. I served tours in Iraq, so I'm an Iraq War veteran.
I finished a 20-year career in 2019. When I started my transition in the Air Force, there was a tremendous outpour of love towards me. It was something I was not expecting. It's when you brace yourself for a hit and the hit never happens. And it was such a great experience. It makes me feel that people truly can change and that people truly can see something that is different to them and accept it.
Most recently, we passed a statewide ban on conversion therapy, which is the dangerous practice of trying to change the sexual orientation or gender identity of minors.
I remember being an 8-year-old kid, always feeling that I knew God loved me because he had to, but it was like, I don't think he likes me. Conversions therapy tells you you can change, and you believe that. So what happens when you don't change? Your self-esteem plummets. Your shame is just compounded because you're like, there's something so gross about me that no matter how much time I put in, I'm not changing. I went through conversion therapy starting at age 17 till I was 28. I said sorry every single day of my life. I said sorry to God because of the feelings I felt. It doesn't work. If this law would have passed when I was a kid and I would have known about it, I think it would have just planted a seed saying, maybe I'm okay. So hopefully for kids out there, it sends that message of, oh, there's people out there that don't see this as a sickness that can be cured.
Over the last 4 or 5 years, as the laws have changed, you see a huge shift in the culture as well. It's not just we have legal protections, but now the LGBTQ community is being treated differently by their neighbors, by their family. Being black and gay is, I mean, I got the 2-for-1 deal, you know what I mean? I was born with it. Navigating this space can be really tricky sometimes. So while I was at BYU, I got involved with the on-campus sketch comedy group, which eventually became a sketch comedy TV show with BYU TV, which happens to be tied to the LDS Church. And it's broadcast all around the country. All he asks is that we do one thing. What's that? It's pray.
Come on, man. Just get it over with.
It grew from a little show on BYU TV to having like millions of subscribers on YouTube, which was crazy. As I was steeped into Utah and LDS culture, I was very intimidated to come out because that's not something in this very conservative culture that is widely accepted. And I was concerned about losing all the audience we'd built, the support of my friends, and even like professional respect from my peers. But I couldn't not come out, you know, it's part of who I am. And so eventually I did come out, and it was nothing what I expected. It was very positive.
I am so proud of the state for the progress that we have made. These laws are not just words on paper. You know, they have a real-world impact in the lives of our community. We still have challenges. It's not a perfect state, and there is so much more for us to do, particularly around transgender issues. But we have a system now of advancing equality that whenever there are issues, those communities come to the table. Nothing about us without us. We call it the Utah way.
We have to look back at history to see how far we've come. You know, people often feel unrepresented in politics. If we're truly listening to understand, then there can be a meeting of the minds. We're in a much better place, a much more inclusive place, and I think that's good for the state of Utah and good for us personally.
Yeah, it's a beacon to the nation, you know, of how people, different ideologies can get together and work through and solve problems.
Okay, go! These changes that protect LGBTQ people mean a lot to me as a person who is now married to my wife and who has an almost 5-year-old son. And it means for us that our family is protected. When I think about my kid growing up here in Utah, I can't imagine what it would have been like 10 years ago. Having a kid and being a family of 2 moms. I think there was question for a long time about whether or not this place was welcoming to us, and would we want to keep our family and our skills and our money here in Utah? And the answer was ultimately yes, because we saw it moving in the right direction.
The Utah economy really has benefited from our actions to make Utah a more welcoming place and a place where LGBTQ people feel valued.
If you look over the horizon, there are a lot of cranes, there are a lot of buildings being built. I think the Utah Compromise has shown the world that we're a welcoming state. It's improved the economy. It's brought new ideas. It's broadened our thought process. Everything that I hold dear, it has helped improve.
We call our tech sector Silicon Slopes. Roughly about 40% of our state's economic growth in the last 10 years has come from the tech sector.
Utah is a great draw for entrepreneurs and companies. Fundamentally, tech people like to break things, make things better, make improvements. And Utah really fosters that through not only kind of the culture, but the community and also through our laws.
A lot of businesses were watching this progress very closely. Adobe and others, they were saying, well, we're not going to go to a place if we can't ensure that our employees will be treated fairly. The fact that the state protects LGBTQ people is a real selling point for businesses looking to relocate to Utah.
When I look back over what we've achieved, it's a win-win for everyone. The changes we've made have been extremely popular in our state. There was a recent poll that showed that 77% of our state supported non-discrimination laws for the LGBTQ community. We ranked second highest in the nation.
I hope what it sends is that we are a state that very much invests in people. And I think that's really what you're doing here, is investing in the well-being of your society.
What happened in Utah with the Utah Compromise was clearly a miracle. Very rarely will you get to see an opportunity where the faith-based community and the LGBTQ community and the business community could all come together and peacefully coexist. I think that should be the goal of all of us.
The Utah Compromise shows us that when we come together, when we work hard and don't give up on each other, that we can come to solutions that make our nation a better place.
I think there are people of goodwill on both sides of this debate between LGBT rights and religious liberty. And if they can just listen to each other with a special attention for finding the values that they share with each other, they can strike an appropriate balance between the values of LGBT civil rights and religious liberties.
There are naysayers. There are people who don't believe that religious liberty can coexist with LGBTQ rights. That's simply not true. We have proven that here in Utah time and time again. And if we can do it in Utah, we can do it throughout the entire country.
Well, great. That was the video that put together for this panel. It's really going to be a tough act to follow for our panelists, but I think we can at least make a good attempt at it. The video in and of itself really showcases the details that went into creating this deal on LGBTQ rights and religious freedom in Utah, and makes a very strong case on how that could be applied elsewhere, including at the national level. And we have, with us in our panelists, Troy Williams, who is the executive director of Equality Utah, and was definitely a leader in getting this deal together. And I'd like just to kind of start off with our panel, just because ask him to give us the 101 on the process that went into this deal, and maybe talk a little bit about what the law does do and what the law doesn't do. But before I actually kick it off, though, I got to remind everyone that our viewers, you can ask questions using the live chat in YouTube and Facebook. You can also tweet questions to hashtag BPC Live. That's hashtag BPC Live. And that will be forwarded to me, and then I can ask whatever questions you would like for our panelists. So, but let me, as I said, let me take it over to ask Troy. If you could give us kind of like a brief summary of the process that led to this deal.
Yeah, as we said in the film, this really took us 7 years until we could get to this point. Equality Utah had been working at passing municipal ordinances with the capital city, Salt Lake City, starting, I think in 2009, we passed our first ordinance, and we went from city to city and county to county working on that. But the ultimate goal was always to have a statewide bill. And that was always our big hope. And so every year that we had tried to actually bring a state law forward, it was crushed pretty quickly. There wasn't a lot of appetite for that. But, you know, we'd had a lot of conflict in the state of Utah over Proposition 8. There was a lot of, protests and rallies and a lot of tension. But the LDS Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, started reaching out to my predecessor and other leaders in the LGBTQ community, around 2008, 2009, and we just started having private conversations behind closed doors and just getting to know each other and really hearing and sharing stories and sharing concerns. There was a lot of listening that happened. And to our surprise and to our delight, in 2009, when we were on the evening that we were passing Salt Lake City's first non-discrimination ordinance, the LDS Church stepped forward and endorsed the process, which was monumental for us. And we recognized in that moment, we could keep fighting over all of the things that we disagreed on, or we could step back and have dialogue and say, where do we agree? And what the church has said to us was, of course, a person shouldn't be fired from their job or evicted from their home because they're gay or transgender. And that really became the place where we began to focus. And then just, by 2015, they were ready to come to the table, and really we sat around that table, and it wasn't an easy process. I mean, the video makes it look like, it all kind of went smoothly. It was challenging. It was difficult. There was still a lot of questions and suspicions, and building those relationships of trust were really critical. But we got there, and we provided protections for the LGBTQ community. For the first time in state history, we provided employment and housing protections. And I'm also going to let you all know, this is the first time in the history of the country when a Republican-controlled legislature passed pro-LGBTQ legislation. But the church was also, this is a sensitive time around marriage equality. And the church said, look, we don't want someone being fired or evicted from their jobs because of their deeply held religious beliefs around marriage. And we agreed with that, right? We can't be canceling each other if we disagree with each other. And so when we recognized their concerns and our concerns, we came to the table and we were able to sort of hammer out a deal.
The deal that came together, made Utah, which I think most of us can agree is one of the most conservative states in the country, also kind of a pioneer on LGBTQ rights, and very unexpectedly.
We are all about pioneers in the state of Utah.
Well, I mean, of course, it's very appropriate, a very appropriate metaphor there. So the deal came together signed by Governor Herbert in 2015, right? Yep. We're in, of course, 2021 now. Can you talk us a little bit about what the impact that deal has had and what we've seen since that time in the state of Utah?
The state of Utah with Governor Herbert, and again with his predecessor, or with his successor, Governor Cox, they've really adopted this ethos of nothing about us without us. We call it the Utah way here in the state, and that when there are policies that impact a community, that we should be at the table helping to shape those policies. And that's, for the most part, has really been the standard that we have been working through in the state. We still, we've seen across the country over the past year a wave of bills that are targeting transgender youth. None of those bills have really advanced far in Utah, because when lawmakers push those bills forward, they don't actually work together with us to actually sort of hammer out those complicated nuances. So we are at the table, and we have great dialogue with lawmakers still, and we still have great dialogue with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we still don't agree on everything. In fact, there's many times when we have deep disagreements about issues. But what I'm really grateful for the church is that even when we have disagreements over issues and something upsets us, They always answer the phone when I call, and they're always willing to sit down and engage. We never turn our back on each other here in Utah. The president of the Senate, the speaker of the House, always take our calls, always welcome us in, and we're able to have that dialogue. And that, I think, is what's really critical. We go into fight or flight mode a lot over these issues, right? The amygdala fires up and we're ready to sort of punch or we recoil from each other. And in Utah, we've learned that when we face really difficult, complicated, stressful situations, we have to stay present with each other. Even if we are in deep disagreement, we have to stay present. And when we do, good things happen. As the video says, we were able to repeal the no promo homo law, which restricted public school teachers from talking about gay or transgender issues in the classroom. We have passed an LGBTQ inclusive hate crimes law, and then also in 2020 banned the practice of conversion therapy.
That's quite a long list of accomplishments. You can see how one victory leads to subsequent victories later on.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take this opportunity to take our first question from our viewers, partially because it's actually the next question I want to ask myself, so it kind of dovetails nicely. This question is a two-part question from Daniel Renfield, who asks, what does this mean for other states or for Congress, and what does this mean for faith groups? And I think what I'd like to do, actually, I think we have two panelists who can speak to this issue a little bit, both of those questions a little bit more appropriately. So I'll just kind of break this up and take it over to Tyler, who has been doing a lot of work lobbying Congress on this issue. Do you see the Utah law as a model for enacting, getting Congress to pass an update to our civil rights laws for long-sought protections for LGBTQ people at the federal level?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for putting this together today. Also, I want to thank Olivia and Troy, who are at Equality Utah, who've been on the front lines of this effort, and especially Troy, Cliff Roski, who was in the video, Brandy Balkin, who was in the video, some of the state lawmakers who you saw, Chris, like Senator Stuart Adams, Senator Steve Urquhart. They're people who deserve tons of credit for creating the atmosphere we have in Utah today. Nationally, yes, it means a lot for what's happening nationally. I don't think that it's the Utah law that is the model. I think it's the approach. It's the way that people came together. It's what Troy was calling the nothing about us without us. And that you heard that also from Governor Herbert, who said he would veto a bill from either direction if it was one-sided, that he only wanted legislation that was protective of all people. And so, Chris, I think that the lesson from Utah is to work together for LGBTQ groups and religious groups to find common ground, and for Republicans and Democrats to do their job as elected officials and find common ground. Some of this has to start from the outside in, right? Like, we have to work at the grassroots level to build the support, but ultimately we need the politicians to also work together. And for me, you know, I'm not from Utah. I'm from the South. I'm from Georgia. In Georgia, we don't even have a state level civil rights law, period, in the state of Georgia. And so for me and a lot of other people in the South and in the Intermountain West, we may only get protections from the federal government. And so it's just even more urgency that we need to figure this out at a national level. And we don't need this patchwork of some states, some cities have protections. You know, if you live on a state border, you might commute to work and lose your protections when you cross a state line. And that's just not workable for gay and transgender people. It's not workable for our families or for our communities. So I hope that the inspiration from Utah is the collaboration more than literally, you know, how the legislation was written. I think that that's what a lot of people think this is, and it's not that. This is about cooperation.
Nonetheless, I think that skeptics of the Utah Compromise, particularly on the LGBTQ side, are going to point out how the Utah law isn't as far-reaching as some people might expect. For example, the Utah law completely leaves out the issue of public accommodations. It does address employment and housing, but public accommodations are not addressed in that law. And at the federal level, public accommodations in the aftermath of the Bostock ruling that we got from the Supreme Court last year, there's no protections based on sex under public accommodations. Therefore, there are no LGBTQ protections for in the area of public accommodations. So people who think that that is important would probably look at the Utah law with a very skeptical eye. And the Utah law also does have a significant religious exemption in it for that would be consistent with other measures in the state. So I'm just kind of wondering if you guys could both Troy and both Tyler, if you could kind of address those features of the Utah law, and what would your message to skeptics who would see that as a something that could be built off of? Let's start with Tyler.
We have to have public accommodations protections. We need them in Utah. We need them in all 50 states. We need federal funding protections too, by the way. We need jury service protections. We need credit protections so that banks can't discriminate, which they do. They still discriminate against same-sex couples who are looking for a mortgage or transgender people. This still happens, Chris. And so I don't think that there's a state law anywhere in America that I would say is quote unquote perfect. There's no such thing. Even in the bluest states, there are religious exemptions. And even in the bluest states, there are patchworks of protections. And so I think that Utah acted consistently with how most states have written their civil rights laws. But again, this goes to what I talk about, the spirit of collaboration. The religious protections in Utah aren't that unique. In fact, you could compare them to California and New York, and you would not find significant differences, but you do see a difference in the cultural narrative. You see a difference in the fact that you have an organization like Equality Utah celebrating diversity of viewpoint, celebrating diversity of religion, celebrating diversity in sexuality, and owning the fact that the law has those protections. And I think that's part of this, Chris, is like we can either hide from the fact that we're a pluralistic and diverse society, or we can own it, we can celebrate it, we can acknowledge our disagreements and push forward openly and transparently. I think that that's also part of the message from Equality Utah. I'd be curious what Troy has to say about public accommodations in the future for that. But I think the reason why it's doable in such a conservative state is because of the openness, the spirit of mutual support, that we can do these religious protections that are necessary and are constitutionally required, but own them and message them to the public in a way that shows that there's nothing to fear here.
That's absolutely right. And I want to underscore what Tyler has said. California, New York have religious exemptions in their non-discrimination laws. Okay, so Utah is not unique in that. When I was a young activist in college, I was really I had little patience for incrementalism. I was a revolutionary who wanted to transform the world. But as I got older and actually sort of working within the process, I realized that's how social change actually happens. It is always incremental. So we didn't get every single thing we wanted in the Utah law, but it was a step forward. And without that step forward, we wouldn't have our hate crimes law. We wouldn't have our ban on conversion therapy. We will get public accommodations protections in Utah soon.
I'm going to take another question from our viewers. This one is from Duncan Osborne, who, if it's the same Duncan Osborne I'm thinking of, was one of the leaders of the Service Members Legal Defense Network in the days of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and recently wrote a book on the repeal process. Duncan Osborne asks, and I think I'll direct this question to you, Tyler, since you have more of a national view. Has any other state considered legislation like the Utah law since 2015?
There have been. No other state has successfully passed legislation since 2015, except for one, and that's the Commonwealth of Virginia. Actually, last year passed a law. But what has been happening is that this legislation, similar to Utah's, has been gaining some traction on the Hill, and more than ever, and I think this is a valuable thing for everybody to know, is that right now, Democrats and Republicans in Washington mutually believe that there is an opportunity to legislate. And I think that the conversations are trending to be inspired by what Utah did, both the collaborative process, the mutual support, and a pluralistic approach.
I definitely want to bring in some of our other panelists here so they can talk a little bit about what different communities are seeking from any kind of end product we would get out of Congress. It's going to involve, concerns from the faith community, as well as the transgender community, which still suffers probably a disproportionate amount of discrimination compared to other people in the LGBTQ community. So I like to ask Marian, actually, if she could talk to us a little bit about the faith community issues. If you could talk to us a little bit about your background, and then also what you're hearing from the faith community in terms of what they're seeking for in terms of advancing civil rights while also protecting religious liberty.
Sure. So I have worked in Utah for 10 years now. I ran an LGBT youth center, the Utah Pride Center, the continuum of care for LGBT youth. So working a lot on youth homelessness and suicide prevention. And what I've found from faith communities is they really needed the permission to stand up for LGBT folks. So after the negotiation started and the word got out that, okay, there are faith people really concerned about LGBT folks, then we saw an influx of volunteers, people who cared, people who were really advocating for LGBT rights. And what we're also seeing is that LGBT folks, and more than half of LGBT folks are people of faith, they are feeling more comfortable going to church again, talking to faith leaders again. They're realizing that, I can be part of a faith community too. I don't need to see a faith person as an enemy. Perhaps that's me. And I've been seeing that as we work together now. More and more LGBT people are revisiting their faith roots. And I'm seeing faith people really reaching out to LGBT folks. And it's really beautiful.
Marianne, I think that one thing that we are seeing, if you just look at some of the litigation on this issue in recent years, religious-based child welfare agencies want to be able to place children consistent with their religious beliefs. That was the major issue between the most recent Supreme Court decision that we got this year and the city of Philadelphia v. Fulton. That was the basis of the conflict. I think that based on what we're seeing, that's not the only lawsuit. There's several lawsuits like this around that of religious groups who are seeking this. What do you see as kind of reaching some sort of common ground, something to be acceptable to faith-based groups, faith-based agencies, in a way that would settle this issue as opposed to this ongoing litigation in the courts?
Well, Tyler knows the technical parts of this, but I'll tell you what I see on the ground is that faith groups want to work with LGBT people to achieve their dreams of having a family. And what I saw in Utah, one example was marriage equality. When marriage became legal in Utah for same-sex couples, some of the county clerks just closed up, and there were hundreds of same-sex couples waiting for their marriage licenses that they couldn't access. But what we figured out here in Utah was in a county clerk's office, if a person couldn't joyfully give a marriage license to a couple, they found someone in the office that could joyfully give that license to a couple. So that meant that the folks who, for their sincerely held beliefs, they couldn't do that comfortably. There was someone with a big smile saying, I'm so excited for you as a couple. This is wonderful. And I expect that that's going to happen across the board in the country.
Well, Tyler, since you're brought up there, could you kind of talk a little about this issue, child welfare agencies, and any sort of path to this issue that would make it that'd be acceptable for them in terms of LGBT discrimination and allowing them to what they see as acting inconsistent with their religious beliefs? I would love to, because I think that there are two areas that are going to define this debate moving forward, and it has to do with both transgender freedom concerns and these issues around our LGBTQ youth broadly. And so, because I'd also love to hear how Livia feels like this is moving along. But for adoption and child welfare and all of our kids, for LGBTQ kids, because this is as much about the kids as it is adoptive parents and foster parents, although I would say that disproportionately, a huge portion of foster and adoptive parents in our country are themselves gay or transgender, but so are a lot of the kids. And especially whenever you get to the teenage segment of kids and child welfare, there are some estimates that 40% of the teenagers in the child welfare system are gay or transgender, 40%. And a lot of them have come from conservative areas. A lot of them have come from probably religious conservative homes. A lot of them have been, unsafe, turned out, what have you. And a lot of those are kids who are trans or gender nonconforming. So there's an intersection here of religious providers and LGBTQ people living in a space together
that we're going to have to sort out. And I think that the common theme is that this is also true of a lot of the issues that you're seeing, even in Utah right now, where transgender issues specifically are being debated. And I think that it's where there are natural tensions that some people on the far, far right are looking to exploit that. They're looking to exploit fear. They're looking to exploit just the unknown sometimes. And we have to unite and come together kind of like this great big middle of the country, again, inspired by how this has been done in Utah, and find solutions. There is a way, and I'm not going to get into the legalities of this, but there's absolutely a way that you can make sure that every single qualified LGBT parent in this country can adopt or foster a child and still maintain a role for religious service providers. There's multiple options to do that. But I also think like the real trajectory of this is figuring out how we talk more with conservatives about transgender freedom.
And on the transgender issue, I want to bring Olivia in the conversation. I apologize for taking so much time before we're getting to you. Your voice is definitely very crucial, especially in this one aspect. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're hearing from the transgender community in terms of what their expectations are for any kind of update to the civil rights, in our country? I think that thankfully we're not really having any debate whether or not any sort of that update is going to be, I guess, gay only or transgender exclusive. That debate finally has long passed us. But what are you hearing in terms of like what kind of protections the transgender community is seeking?
Well, I would say the biggest thing that I see on the ground, and really it's something that we see in every sector of society, is we've talked for the last 40 minutes on legal equality. And that's great. We've obtained it. What about lived equality? And that's the aspect where we are for the change, and that is the next step for our society. We can have the rules in place, but does that mean that is actually what is being upheld behind closed doors in schools, in churches, and all sorts of spaces? There's a difference between tolerance and acceptance. And that is what we really want to bring forward. We want to start bridging that gap between tolerance and acceptance. And one thing that I love about my work with Equality Utah and the work that we do just all around the state of Utah, all of the advice that we give out to other states and how they go about their business, and it is finding that middle ground with people, dispelling those notions of fear. And that's the biggest thing that we see whenever we start talking to people. Nobody comes from a place of hate. Everybody has a fear about the unknown. Everybody's scared of the dark. But when we really start bringing a light to that darkness, with education, with showing somebody this is what trans looks like, you start seeing that change in people's hearts. You start seeing that change in people's minds. And that is really where we are overall as a community. We want to start seeing that change take effect. And it's great that we have so many allies here in the state of Utah. I always make it known that Troy Williams, and it's not because it's my boss, I promise, but I always say if it wasn't for individuals like him in our state, we would be in a different state. I mean, would this change have come? Sure, maybe it would have taken longer, but the change that he has brought, the empowerment he brings to being intentional about bringing transgender people on board at Equality Utah, giving us this space, giving us the opportunity to be visible and to show what we truly are, and we can operate in any space, in academia and religious faith, in any space. That is where we really want to see that change. We want to start bringing people with us. We want others to feel educated, that they know what is going on in the state of Utah. Whenever I go around the state and I ask people if they know of the 2015 non-discrimination law that was passed, the majority of individuals in our state say no. And they have no idea. They have no idea that we now have a hate crimes law in the state of Utah. Those little things go such a long way in letting somebody know, hey, Utah actually is leading the way in our country when it comes to protections. There is something here. There is something that we can actually sit down and listen to, and we can truly start changing our own hearts and minds, our own biases towards the transgender community, towards the non-binary, genderqueer community. We can truly start sitting down and saying, like, okay, I don't know what you are, instead of saying things like that, we can truly start opening conversations that say, I would love to learn about your journey. And that is what the transgender community really wants to share. What we really want to see that change. We want to bring that inclusivity piece. We want acceptance.
I think that personal experience is going to be kind of important to these conversations. And I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about how your personal stories, both as a immigrant from Mexico who went on to become a service member, and these experiences, how have they informed the conversations you've been having? And do you think that, based on that, what do you think is the importance of personal stories and moving forward the discussion on this issue?
Sure, it's huge. I mean, personal stories are tremendous. Even before I transitioned, and I transitioned while I was still on active duty, when the 2016 policy came into effect, that very morning, I was right there on the door, knocking on the door, right? And it really changed the narrative of how people would view me. If I would just go around in my local town here in Utah or wherever I was stationed, people would see a service member. And here in our country, we hold service members, veterans in high esteem. But whenever they see a transgender retired veteran, it really starts, you can see that click in people that, oh, this is, wow, I did not know that both could coexist in the same place. You start seeing that transgender people are just people. And that's one of the most wonderful things that I've been able to do in the circles I moved as a military member, as a veteran, even in some of the political work I've done. It's great to see that change in people when they can start seeing and listening to a story of somebody who did immigrate here, who did grow up in a very poor village in Mexico, who came over, was able to serve their country for 20 years, and now is trying to move this needle of progress, which really is progress for all of us. I love to see that. There's a sense of unselfish pride that it brings, that I know we can leave a better world for our children, especially for me, myself. I have a little boy, and I think we can all empathize on that angle. If we can leave this world better for the children, for the coming generations, then we know we've done our job.
I'd like to actually talk a little bit more about some of the nitty-gritty that's happening right now in talks in Congress on this issue. And for that, once again, I want to bring in Tyler, who I know has been taking a lead effort in those talks in Congress. Can you tell us a little bit about, what are the conversations like right now, among lawmakers? And in addition to that, also, could you assess what we're seeing from these major LGBT advocacy communities, like the Human Rights Campaign, the American Civil Liberties Union, groups that have said that they're going to be who have a histories of leading the way in LGBTQ rights? Are they being helpful to this discussion?
Yeah, I will get to that, Chris. I want to make sure everybody knows the playing field as it stands right now. In 2013, the U.S. Senate passed something called the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which was a very stripped down employment-only bill. But this was 8 years ago now, and it won votes from 10 Republicans. It got 64 votes in total. 8 years later, most of those Republicans are still in the Senate. The legislation has changed. What the community, and I think what you're hearing from all four of us, is we're looking for something that's bigger, that's more comprehensive, that ideally has employment, housing, public accommodations, federal funding, all of the protections that we're looking for. And in an ideal world, perhaps also a ban on conversion therapy on kids, which Utah's also been able to successfully pass. But the Republican support is there. We have to meet Republicans where they are, as we did in INDA, as we've done in Utah, as we've done, by the way, I mentioned Virginia passing their law. Whenever they passed it in Virginia, the majority of the Republicans in the state Senate voted yes, along with it. So there is a pool of Republican support. And that's why earlier I referenced kind of like the far, far right that is trying to exploit and divide us and fearmonger. The center right, and a lot of people just on the right, like the mainstream conservatives, want to solve this issue. And of course, they don't view this as a zero-sum game. They want to protect LGBTQ people and religious freedom at the same time. So, Chris, if there is a path to doing that where all sides feel like they have gained protections, because part of our struggle is that we always feel, it's what Troy said, and I don't know if anybody had the word amygdala on their bingo card, but I kind of loved that like we all are coming at this, as LGBTQ people, we're coming into this, we face discrimination. Overwhelming percentages of LGBTQ in their personal lives, LGBTQ people have faced employment discrimination, housing discrimination, etc. And so we come into this sometimes as wounded people, and we're used to having to fight for every scrap that we get. We have to give up some of that mindset and realize that it's not a zero-sum game, that we can gain protections while also gaining protections for others, that it's not zero-sum, that it can be something that protects and expands civil rights for many people, not just us. And so if you approach it with that mindset, and if we have these difficult conversations, which we're kind of glossing over how difficult they can be, working with people with whom you have serious disagreements. But if you go through that and get to the other side, the vision is pass a comprehensive federal bill, get as much as we can, and create a new framework in Washington for bipartisanship on these issues that, Chris, that will be like Utah, something that pays dividends over time. It may not mean we pass another law the next year, but it means we come back in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. We have more opportunities to work on international LGBTQ human rights. It means that we have more opportunities to find even more advances for LGBTQ people. And it does not mean that we are going to win the vote of every single Republican in Congress, but we don't have to. We have to win at least 10. I think that right now, if we do everything right, we're on a trajectory that we could win a lot more than 10 and pass something that's truly historic. You also asked about other LGBTQ groups. I can't speak for them. I can't speak to them on this issue, but what I will say is that this community has had its success from state-led organizations. This was true on marriage. This is true on non-discrimination laws. This has been true on conversion therapy. State organizations have always been the engine of progress in our community, and my prediction is that that's going to continue to be the case, that our real bipartisan progress, the hard work that's done, is done in the trenches out in the states. It's not really done in Washington, D.C. And so I think ultimately the state groups are going to have a lot more influence over their own representatives and senators in Congress than those national groups who you mentioned.
Getting back to the state groups, we have a question coming in from our viewers. We're getting short on time, so I want to make sure I get this out here before time's run out. This is from Mary Margaret H. Wondered if there's any progress with LDS church leaders toward recognition of same-sex couples. And I'd like to ask Troy and Marianne to see if there's what they can tell us on any news on that front.
Oh yeah, give me that hard question for the end. Hey, I come from a long line of Latter-day Saints. My great ancestors crossed the plains with Brigham Young, driven from Nauvoo, settled in Utah. So it's a deep part of my history and my cultural and DNA. So would I love to see the church change on these issues? Absolutely. But as the director of Equality Utah, that's not my role. That's not my job. And it's inappropriate for a state organization like mine to sort of, demand changes internally of the doctrine of the church. So I won't touch that one and just say that there are many gay and transgender Latter-day Saints who would like to see those kind of changes happening. But
Mary, would you have anything to add on this issue about LDS church leaders coming to recognition of same-sex couples?
Yes, I do. I had a text just this morning from a same-sex married couple in a ward, LDS folks, who had received a message from their bishop saying, "Your marriage is an example for everyone. I think it makes God happy. It makes me happy. Bless you." So on the ground, there's beautiful things happening.
Beautiful things happening. And I think our time is coming towards an end here, but we had a beautiful things happening. I think we can say that of this panel that we had. I think we had some really a thorough discussion of these issues. And it kind of sets the stage, I think, for what we're going to be seeing and expecting for as we try to like sort through trying to find agreement on this issue, both on the legal front and on the our lived lives, and on the spiritual front as well in terms of religion. So I think I'm just going to wrap it up there and we'll move on.